Hi everyone, welcome. Today we're going to make this choppy moving water, and we've put some parameters on it that as the speed goes down, it gets less choppy. So this is really an exercise in kind of getting some matchy functions going. And then as it gets down to nothing, it's just kind of sitting there and it's got no chop in it at all. And then the other thing that we can do, we can change the opacity and we can change the direction in which it goes. So we had it going to the left like this, and now we're going to switch directions and we're going to have it go in the opposite direction. And as we get it to speed up, it gets more choppy. That's maybe a little fast, but we can adjust that as we make our actual material. This is just my test material, but that's going to be the idea. So let's take a look at it in Substance. And this is it here. It's not that complicated. It really isn't. And you really do want to keep your animated materials as simple as possible because they'll run better. So without further ado, we're going to start down on this end here. We're going to do the basic waves, and then we're just going to start adding stuff on top of it. So let's make a new substance, and we'll call this Choppy Water. And I'm going to I think I'm going to optimize it for 1K because that's what I had my test going at. And it still runs okay at 2K, but I like the way it runs better at 1K. Now, we're going to move these guys around first. So I have my normal. I like to have my height next to my normal. That's just me. And we're not going to use a metallic, but I am going to have a specular level. So let's change this to a specular level, and we'll change the name. And I'm also going to want an ambient occlusion. So I'm just going to duplicate this base color, and we'll change that to our AO. Okay. Now, before I go ahead and send these out to the 3D view, I want to put a white in that ambient occlusion because otherwise that's going to happen. Because by default, if you put nothing in here, it's going to read it as black, and that means everything is 100% occluded right now. And that's easily solved. All we have to do is that. And, once we do an AO, we'll just replace that. Okay. So we are now ready to build our material. I'm going to go into the library, and I'm going to go into my noises, and I'm going to pick out this creased right here, and I'm going to get a purlin noise, and well, we'll save the other ones for later. Okay, before we do anything else, we're not going to need either one of these at full strength. So I'm going to make each one of these parent -1, and that's going to lower their size. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to get a warp node, and I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to warp it against this guy. And I had the warp set down like really low. It's like 0.07 in my notes. But let's see what that looks like. So we've got our base color there, and let's get a height to normal, and we can get a rough idea of what our normals are going to look like as well. What we're doing with this warp is we're taking these very straight lines here, and we're just starting to squiggle them up a bit. So I can highlight this warp in here, and we can fool around with this intensity. So if you want them more wiggly, make it more warpy, but that's what this does. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is I am going to start creating the movement of my waves. Now, we've got two noises here that each have their own parameters. And specifically for the creased, this disorder parameter just wiggles these things around. So that's useful for us. And what I had in my notes, and this is what, like in the intro, what I was alluding to was a little bit too fast. I just went ahead and put time on this. So for the moment, let's do that. We're probably going to slow it down a little bit. And then I kind of want to do the same thing to this purlin noise, because this one on top is going to be moving, and then this one on the bottom will also be moving, so they'll be like moving extra. Again, I'm just going to get to that drop down list. I'm going to plunk in time in there, And, you know, we may as well adjust the speed of this ripple now. So I am going to save this and we're going to publish it out. Publishing it out will actually also save it because it saves it by default and it's going to force me to save it. So I'm going to call this Choppy Water and we'll save it as Choppy Water archive. And then we'll come in here and we will open up Choppy Water. So I think that's kind of fast. And we're going to go back now and maybe slow it down a bit. So what I can do is I can come into my original function here. And this disorder, I had already dropped time in there. All I have to do is click on this icon and I can edit this. And to slow it down, we'll get a float. We will get a multiplication. And we're going to multiply this time by some number that is less than 1. See what 0.5 looks like. In fact, you know what? I'm going to simplify my existence. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a temporary input parameter. And I'm going to switch it out for that constant. And this way we can just do it in the viewer. And we don't have to keep bouncing back and forth. I'm going to keep this here because eventually we're going to turn it into a constant. And then I'm going to right click on this multiplication and set that as my output and republish it. So if we come back here and refresh it, now don't forget that the purlins are still wiggling real fast, so we're going to adjust those later. But I think that's probably better. So that's 0.414. I can just copy that. I'm going to come back to my substance, and I'll just pop that in there, and that's done. And then we can do the same thing for this one. I should have just copied the whole thing. So now we're looking at the small squiggles. Yeah, I think that's better. You know, I also want to see whether we can't make them a little bit better. And I think that involves just making them a bit bigger. Oh, and we also forgot to change that warp. Let's one thing at a time. I'm going to bring the scale of these down a little bit. So that's actually going to make them a little bit bigger. And since we brought these parent -1, I want to come into this warp node and I want to make it relative to parent, not relative to input. So now it's going to get its sizing information from the parent size, not from the inputs. Let's publish that out again. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. Yeah, I want those faster. Okay, so let's do it like 0.8. Okay, I'm going to save that. I don't think we need to publish that out again to look at it. We can just keep moving. And that is literally the next thing we're going to put in here. We want to create a couple of inputs. I'm going to hang on to that temp for now just in case we need it later. But the first thing I want to do is I want to create an offset that is animated. And then we need to create a switch that's going to switch the directions of the waves. Right now they're pointing left, and then we want to be able to switch it so they're pointing right. And we're going to put it all on the same transform 2D matrix. Well, on the same transform 2D node. It's got two different parts of it. Let's make our offset. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make it a float 1 because we're not really going to offset the y. We're just going to offset the x. So we'll take care of that inside the function. There's no point in making it a float 2. So actually, and let's call it speed. I think offset is confusing. So we'll call it water speed. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to create something that's going to switch those two water types out. And you know, there's a couple ways to do this. I decided to do it with an integer and a drop-down list. And we'll call this direction. So we have a 0 value and we can call that left because that's the default. And then we'll just add another one and we'll call that right. So as far as these integers here are concerned, the number 0 corresponds with the left and the number 1 corresponds with going right. Alrighty. So we've got our transform 2D node here. And let's set up our transform matrix first. If you guys haven't done this before, I highly recommend you go back and do some of the videos where I touch on this, but the default position, this is a float 4, is 1001. If we go back here and switch it 180 and come back and look in here, all it's done is it's turned it negative. And that's the kind of function we're going to have to make here. So we'll make an empty function, and we'll go ahead and click edit on that. And this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to grab a couple of constants, float 4s, and I'm going to set up those two things that we need to have happen. It's either going to be 1001, or it's going to be -100, -1. The next thing I'm going to need is going to be my variable. So I'm going to get my integer. And now we need to set up a conditional statement. So let's get an equals. And we're going to get okay. In this particular case, I can get a float because it's a 0. If it's anything other than a 0, you need to make it match to integer. So we might as well get into the habit of getting an integer here. And they have the same color. That means they work together. So if water direction equals 0, which is our default leftward facing water, because that's what it's doing right now, then we want 1001. Otherwise, we want -100, -1. And it wants this float 4, and that's what we're going to give it. And we can plug that in there. I'm holding down the shift key, and well, it doesn't like doing it with normals for some reason, and it doesn't like doing it with output nodes for some reason, but normally you can actually move the noodles that way. So let's see if our parameter works, and it switches direction. Great. Okay, so that's part of it done. Now the other thing we have to do is the movement, and that's going to be on the offset. So I'm going to click on there. I'm going to go empty function. We'll click on that to edit, and let's pull out some nodes. So we're going to want our water speed, and we're animating it, so we're also going to need a $time, and we're going to need a couple of multiplication nodes. And then I'm going to get a constant, and this is a number I came up with just by fooling around again with that temp variable that I had before. And I'm taking whatever water speed is, and I'm cutting it, I'm taking a quarter of it, and only then am I multiplying it by time, just because time was too fast. So I just got to those numbers by trial and error, because if we have it run, just on time, it's going to be running as fast as those waves that were too fast. So we need to slow it down, and that's how we're doing that. And here we have a result, but this is a float 1, and we need a float 2. So we're going to get a vector float 2, and we're going to get another constant. So we want this to move along the x. So all of this animation is happening along the x-axis, and along the y-axis, it's not moving at all. Now, feel free to make this move differently, but I'm going to keep it simple. And then this becomes our output node. Now, I just want to mention something, because it took about half an hour of my life as I was doing this test to figure out why this wasn't working. Very often, I have a direction switch on a different Transform 2D. And if you wanted to go in the opposite direction, you negate this number here. So it's going, it's going backwards. I mean, you can negate it in a bunch of different ways, but this number needs to start moving negative instead of positive. And it was not working for me. And I finally realized that the reason it wasn't working, and this is why I'm mentioning it, actually didn't occur to me. As we switched the direction in the matrix, this is actually continuing to travel in the same direction, and you just flip the whole thing, including the movement. So when I was negating this number to move it in the opposite direction, I was actually canceling out what I wanted to happen. So because we have the transform matrix with these negative numbers, we can leave this as a positive, and these negatives are taking care of it in here. Right, that was a lot of words, but I thought it's worth mentioning, because it stumped me for a while. I was like, why is it doing that? And that's why it was doing it. So if you ever come across something like that, double check to make sure that you're not canceling negatives out, because that's what I did for 20 minutes banging my head against a wall. Right, let's get a couple more Transform 2D nodes. And these are, I'm just going to use to later on adjust how my end result looks with these waves. Because when I was originally doing this, you can kind of see it here. Notice how there's just more white on the inside of this image as opposed to on the edges. And it kind of gave me an uneven kind of tiled effect, which I wasn't happy with. So I'm going to kind of cancel that out in here by blending these guys together with a lighten blend. So I'm double clicking on the blend. I'm going to come into the first one and I'm going to move it along the x-axis until I start getting stuff that's a bit more even. And I'm going to do the same thing here, except I'm going to move it in the opposite direction. So it just kind of evens it out a little bit. Now the next thing I want to do is get a gradient map. And we're going to use this as a grayscale. So I'm just going to turn that into a grayscale. And I want to drop back some of these darker areas. I want to create more contrast between these are going to be like the choppy wave tops. So I kind of want more black in these areas in here. And the easiest way to do that is to just go ahead and assign new values, you know, to what I've got in here. So I just want to make sure I'm double clicking on that. And I can copy that white and put another white in here. And then kind of do the same thing here. Actually, we don't need to do that. We just move this up. You know, I still want some gradient in there, but you know, it's starting to make some real like hills and valleys in here, which is kind of what waves are. So that's probably more like what I wanted, maybe even a bit more. Again, we can always come back and adjust that. And we're going to control how these disappear according to the speed. And we're going to do it in this levels node here. So if we double click on this levels, as I take this level in low and I move it up, those things begin to disappear. Okay, so I want it to disappear more. Look, because this is going to be around about 0, right? So I want less. So I can come back into my gradient editor and just fine tune this. I mean, you don't have to have it like completely gone, because in this levels node, if you actually bring it down all the way up to 1, it'll pop it out anyway. But like at that last bit, so it'll have just like these 2 little wavelets before they cut off altogether. If you don't want that, then you can go back and do this gradient map some more. But you don't want to take too much out, because then you have to make sure that it's working at the other end. Oh no, I lost it. When that happens, you can come into values and do it by hand here like that. Yeah, you see, I think this is too much. So I'm going to come back in here and move this back down again. Let's see what happens. I'm double clicking on that point. We just gray it just a little bit. Messed that up. Make sure that there. Yeah, that's actually probably pretty good. We might change our minds as we actually watch it animate, but I think for now that's okay. Right. The next node we're going to use is something called the Quantize node. And we're going to use the grayscale version of it. And this is a pretty cool node. It's going to take a grayscale value that you put in here, and it's going to kind of tunify it. And you can sort of tell how many of these average areas, so it's taking the grayscale in a certain spot, and it's just kind of averaging out the grayscales, and it's just like picking a value and it's putting it in there. But you can get these really cool tune effects using this. So if like you bring it all the way up, it's your original image, and you're just kind of, like, I don't know, quantizing it, but it's cool. And we're going to just set it down to the lowest number, which is 2. So it's either black or white. And this is going to be our mask. I'm going to adjust it a little bit more here. And I think that will be fine. Now, you'll notice it's kind of a dense node. And honestly, we don't need this at parent size. It's really not that much information. So I'm just going to drop it down by 1. But then we have to remember that the next node that we put in here, which is going to be a warp, we got to make sure that we set that relative to parent. And now we want to warp this against something. Right now, let's take a look. Right now they're still, they're curvy. Waves are curvy like that, but they're still very straight. and I want to break them up a bit more. So the one I chose was crystal 1. And again, I'm going to make this parent -1. And I had the warp intensity set to 0.1. But you could set it to something else. Now, those are looking way too jaggedy for waves right now. But we're going to run this through a bevel now. And that's going to curve it out and give it like pointy tops. But, you know, we needed them jagged first. And again, I'm going to, I'm wondering whether it's worth, well, I want to bring this one down. Again, it's working very hard and it doesn't really need to work that hard. But I'm not sure whether we need to jack it back up here. Let's fool around with it a little bit. First of all, let's set this up how we want. And I had it set at -0.04, which kind of gives me these, you know, it's got these stringy edges to them, which is the effect that I was going for. We are going to blur this out, and whatever we do over here, we're certainly going to want this at parent size. So let's go ahead and set that up. And I just want to see whether it makes a difference how we do the resolutions on these guys. So this blur I had set at 0.09, so just a little bit, just to take the hard edges off. Now, while I'm watching this, because I've got this set at parent size, I'm going to single click on this warp that I have at a higher res, and I'm going to drop it down. And I want to watch what happens. Honestly, I'm not seeing that much of a difference. I'm going to bring this back up, and I bet you that's going to be exactly the same. So we're going to have these just be parent -1 until they get back up into this node. I think it's probably a better way of doing it. Okay, let's make some room here. Okay, so those are going to be our, well, the mask anyway for our wave top. We're going to, you know, the foam is going to be appearing according to this mask, which is why I wanted these strings. And I don't mind having these flat tops because this gradient here is just going to be how that foam fades in and out from the blue. So we have the white foam and there's kind of like this intermediate light blue area, and this works very well with the bevel like that. So even though it doesn't look like that yet, it's actually a pretty good mask for what we're going to be making our foam out of. But the one thing that we haven't actually dealt with yet, oh, actually we haven't dealt with this one either, our levels node here. Right, let's do them both together. I talked about it. I don't think we actually set up the, no, we didn't. We need to put a parameter on this so that as our water speed goes down, this goes up. So it's inverse to our water speed. But other than that, it's a 0 to 1. So it's actually super simple to do. We come in here, we go into our values, level and low. I'm going to hit on the function thing. We're going to make an empty function. I'm going to edit that and get a couple of nodes. We want our water speed. So if we do 1 minus our water speed, it's actually going to invert whatever this number is because they're both numbers that are going from 0 to 1. So now if we keep looking at this levels, as we change our water speed, as it goes down, those start to disappear. Okay, but that's only talking about the little wave tops. We haven't really dealt with the, you know, the whole thing. So we're going to need to get, well, I'm going to use a blur node because as the water slows down, this is distracting. Let me go back to that. So when our water is moving fast, we have this intensity low. And then as it slows down, this intensity goes up. And again, you can, you know, tweak it how you want. The numbers I had in here, I'll put in, but it's the same idea as this levels node. We're just moving it according to that variable. So again, we're going to hit empty function, and just like the other one, it's moving invertly. Oh, I should have copied it from the previous one. Well, so we start in the same spot. However, if we come and take a look, oh, we can't see it. Let's get another blur node. If we take a look at the blur node, this intensity runs from 0 to, well, whatever number you want, but it's going in whole numbers. It's not just going from 0 to 1. So we need to multiply this number here by something. And that something is whatever you want it to be. I chose 9.805 up. So, you know, kind of 10-ish. And we're going to get a multiplication node. And all I'm really doing here is setting the maximum of my slider. So it's going to go from 0 to whatever this number is. So you know, you can decide how smooth do you want it to go. And I kind of like it with these creases here. So I left those because you could also set a floor. You could set a floor in here. You could add a small number in here, you know, but I like it that way because you know, they do have those kinds of creases. So I think that's actually perfect the way it is. Let's get rid of that. So let's take a look at our parameter again. As the speed goes down, it smooths out. Excellent. So I believe that that is the waves bit of all of this done. So we can draw a frame around it, and we can call it waves. Oh, you know what? Before we go on, we forgot to do this guy. We want to do the same thing that we did here as far as getting the disorder to move. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to paste it into this guy. And we set that as the output node. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the foam. And for that, I'm going to get cells 1. And this one, I'm going to have parent -2. And we'll grab a couple of transform 2D nodes and a blend and a multiply. I mean, sorry, and a levels. We're going to multiply this blend, though. Okay, so let's hook this up. We're just going to create a little variety in what's going on here. The first thing we're going to do is set both of these relative to parent. And one of them will leave relatively large, so like that. Yeah, I just want to make sure I got my numbers right. Again, you can do different sizes. That's just the sizes I had in my notes. And then this one I had at 16. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That one's really small. And then we're going to multiply them together. And what I want to do with this levels node is some more variety in here. Oh, you know what? That's why, because I had this much bigger in my original notes. I'm like, that doesn't look anything like what I had it. I had this set up much larger, probably more like that. Yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted like these divots in here. That's better because it creates like this undulation. So this is going to be seen through a mask, but within it, it's got a lot of variety, and that's exactly what I want. And I'm going to get another levels node, and we can take the whole thing and just get rid of some of the lighter tones. So it starts to kind of look like foam a little bit. And then we're going to get another transform 2D. And we're going to come back into this transform 2D. And we're going to copy this because I don't feel like doing it again. And then I'm going to come back in here, make an empty function, and paste. We'll set that as the output node. So it's moving. These guys are doing what they're doing at the same speed as what these guys are doing. And then again, just like all of these other ones, we are going to get that disorder to animate as well. You know, and feel free to fool around with like the timings on them. I'm not going to get too crazy with it, but obviously when you do your own material, you can take a lot more time as far as fine tuning what all the various animations are doing. And, you know, so you can do that, you know, just by changing all these numbers and using those temp inputs to make your life easier. All right, so that is now our foam. And now it's just a question of bringing all this stuff together and starting to work on our actual material. I'm going to get a blend node, and I'm going to put my foam into the foreground. I'm going to leave my background blank, which is you know, when I'm doing a grayscale, it's going to leave it black. And then this is the mask that I'm using for my foam. And there it is. So that's what I liked about the bevel, that it gives me like these little squiggly bits, but it's no longer looking like a sharp bevel anymore. Okay. So now all we need to do is actually build out the material. Let's start with the normal. Okay, we've already got this hooked up. we're gonna want a normal from our actual foam. And I also want, actually, I don't need a normal for that. I want this normal in here as well from the bevel. And I'm gonna combine that with my waves. And I'm gonna use an overlay blend. And I can come into my bevel node. And I can do some things to it that will kind of soften this out. But what I want to see happen is I want, you know, the areas where the foam is to actually be raised up more than the waves, not just, you know, foam. So we'll come down here. Now the distance, I'm looking at my notes, the distance we already did. What we didn't do is our smoothing. And we can also set the intensity of the normal. So I set this way down to 2.25. And I also smoothed it out a bit, 0.38. We'll stick with 0.39, that's fine. And that makes it a lot less severe. So it just kind of raises those edges up where the foam is going to be. Okay, so we have our foam, and now all we want to do is lay that on top. But again, I did this all through trial and error. I stuck a little blur in here after looking at it because it was just a bit too harsh without. But again, that's your decision to make. We can try it without first just to see. And again, we're going to use an overlay blend. And I just thought that was kind of harsh. So I put a blur in here and I had it set in at 0.38, I think. So it just kind of softens them out a little bit. I think we could probably take a look at this in the player and see how far we've gotten. I realize we haven't done that in a while, and it's always a good idea when you've got animations to keep double checking them, make sure everything's still squared away. Okay. So it switches direction. And it's doing what it's supposed to do as it slows down. I think we're probably going to have to revisit that. There's a lot of dead space in here. We'll worry about that later. Let's get back to substance. Right, so the normals are good. Let's take care of our color. And we're going to get a gradient map. And we're going to plug it right into this mask because this is giving us all the color info we need. I'm going to come into my gradient editor and I'm going to start fooling around with colors. So we'll pick a nice blue. And I don't want to have just a straight up gradient. I'm going to put a little bit of variety in here. So I'm going to pick a couple of related colors. Yeah, we're going to have to see how that works with the normals. I think for now we'll leave it like that. It's kind of cool. Out of curiosity, I want to see what it looks like at 2K. I want to try and experiment. This, I believe, is already set to parent. I'm pretty sure that we can bring this down here and it's going to be exactly the same. Going to save some processing because it only gets stepped up at the very end here. I think if we're going to do that, I'm going to see what happens if we move that normal intensity up a bit. Kind of compensate for, too much. I also don't think, is the height set in here? Yeah, that's part of our problem. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. We don't have height in here. Well, for the moment, I'm just going to put this in. Yeah, that looks pretty good, actually. I think I want to see a bit more of a bleed in that color, though, at the edges. So, take all of this and move it up. Like that. All right, so that's color done. Let's make our opacity. and that's going to be a float 1. And we're going to base our opacity off of, like where there's foam, it's going to be a little bit more opaque than where there's water. So again, this mask right here is perfect to use as is. All we need to do is, just change the levels a bit. And we do it with the level out low. So full opacity, I mean, the white isn't getting any whiter. But as we move the slider down, the black is getting progressively more black. So it's going through the grays and then it's going all the way to clear. And that is the direction that we need it to go. So more opaque, less opaque. I'm going to click on here, empty function. We're going to get our opacity. Now, we're going to multiply it by 0.5 because I don't want this to go all the way down to clear. I want my opacity, let's get another levels. I want my opacity to function in this top part of the scale. So I only want, like the 0 to 1 movement, I have to convert it from 0 to 0.5. That's the length of the movement. But I now need to add the start point too, because I want it to start at 0.5 as well. So we also need to get an addition, turn this into 0.5. So I only wanted to move through half the scale. So I'm taking that 0 to 1, cutting it in half, and then I'm adding it to 0.5. And that's going to be our output. And then we can just plug this into our opacity. Did we make an opacity? Specular level roughness, AO. No, we never made an opacity. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to duplicate my AO and I'm going to rename it. And most importantly, I'm going to change its designation. And now we have to actually send it out here. So last time we did view outputs in 3D view, which actually sends all of them out at once. We can also have this node highlighted, right click and view in 3D view, and then actually assign it the channel we want individually. And there it just went a little bit translucent for us. We can't really tell with the background the way it is. Let's switch that out. There we go. So I went environment, edit is visible. Just makes it easier to see. So we have our opacity. It's currently set at 1. Oops, wait, did we forget to invert it? Do we need to invert it? Did I even set it up? No, I didn't set it up. How about that? Okay, I've been doing that all day. Oh, no, we did set it up. I was like, yeah, I'm sure we set that up. It's because I've got the wrong one plugged in. There we go. I'm tired. I'm not that tired. Right, so we have it set at 1. And then as we go down, it's getting more translucent, but it stops at 0.5. So that is its most translucent state. Get rid of that so it stops confusing us. I'll make a frame just so we know what this guy is. Next, let's do, since we're up here, do the ambient occlusion. I'm going to get another level. And again, we're going to base it off of this. Now, for the AO, normally, I mean, I don't tend to put ambient occlusion in water because I just don't. In this case, I decided it looked better if it's got a little bit because, you know, they're kind of choppy and they're high. And if you think about, you know, how it would be in reality, there would in fact be some shadows on here. There would be occluded light. So I'm going to just put a touch. And I especially want it, I don't really want it on top here. I want it kind of along these edges where it's kind of folding over into the smoother water. And that's why I have this levels node here, because I kind of want to wash out all those bubbles. Let's go the other direction. I want the edges to stay soft. Those are the ones that are going to get kind of weird and dark. But these top bits, I kind of want out of play as far as the AO is concerned. Probably like that. And then let's get an ambient occlusion. And that is just insane. So we're going to have to really, really tone it down. Okay. Let's get into our node. Well, let's just turn the GPU optimization on. We can bring it down to 4 samples because we only just want the barest minimum. I'm going to bring this radius way down. I'm also going to bring the height depth way down. And this way, it kind of, it's almost still too dark. Yeah, in my original, I didn't have these little dark spots in here. Let's find a way of getting rid of those. Let's see what happens if we put a blur in here. I think that's better. I think maybe take the radius down a bit more. Yeah. So it does make a difference. I mean, you can tell. I think it just gives it more depth. So if you don't want it, it's not that big a deal. I just think it looks a little bit better with it on. All right, and last but not least, we have our roughness and our specular level, which are related. Yeah, it looks all right. What I want to see happen with the roughness is, again, I want the foam to be just slightly, a little bit less rough than the water. And you guessed it, we're going back to that same mask because it's giving us the relationships that we need, where the water is black, it has the least amount of roughness, and the foam is white, and it's got the most, and all we need to do is actually find the right amounts here. Just make sure, yeah. So something like that. And then the specular level is essentially the inverse of that. So that water is nice and glassy now, and the foam not so much. Maybe even make it a little bit less glassy. I mean, even less specular. There, I think that's better. All right, let's take it for a test drive. Yeah, it looks pretty good, I think. So we can change the direction. And we can start slowing it down. Oh, I remember we had problems with this. We have to fix the foam. All right, so the problem is at the bottom end of this. We've got like from 2.21 down to 0. So that last quarter of the slider, there's really nothing going on. I'd like to see whether or not I can't make that work a little bit better. I'm going to have to figure out a way of doing that because I kind of like the way it is up here. But other than that, I think it's looking pretty done. Okay, so our problem is in this levels node. And if we look at it, we've got it running from 0 to 1. I mean, we've inverted it, but it's a number that goes from 0 to 1. And in, that last quarter, as you're going down, there's nothing. So if you think about it, essentially, that slider has too much play on it. And what we need to do is to make it tighter. And since it's 1/4, that's kind of dead space, I'm going to just get rid of that 1/4. So instead of having the slider run from 0 to 1, we're going to have it run from 0 to 0.75. And we're going to do that just by multiplying this result by 0.75. Now, that's going to take care of like part of the problem. So let's take a look at our speed. So our speed is all the way up. And as we're bringing it down, slowly, the foam is going away. We've hit kind of that 0.25 mark. I think it was 0.21. Still going strong. We still got stuff. That's good. So none of, this isn't empty anymore. And then we're down to 0, but not quite. We got these little guys. So we've got like this really still water, and we're going to have these little guys pop up. And the reason is when we first did this levels node, I'm just borrowing this one. When we first did this levels node, we had this running from 0 to 1. And when it went all the way up to the number 1, it automatically popped everything out because there's nothing there. We're stopping short. We're stopping somewhere over here. So there's still stuff there. And we can't take care of that last 0.25% on the high end using the levels node, but that's okay because there's a really easy fix for it. I'm going to take the results of this levels node, and I got this blend node, and we're going to put a function on this opacity so that if it's 0, like if our water speed is 0, we're just going to make it so you can't see it. Otherwise, you can see it. So let's make an empty function. We'll get a couple of floats. We'll get our variable water speed. All right. So if our water speed equals 0, I don't want to see anything through that blend node. Otherwise, I want to see everything. And we'll set that as the output node. And then we can plug it in here. And we just got rid of those little corner thingies. So it'll just clean up that last bit. So as the water speed goes up, getting more and more of those guys. And then as it goes down, we get less. When we're at 0.01, we have just a tad. But then if we drop it down to 0, everything goes away. So I think that's it. Let's take a look. All right, so that's clean now. Just want to see what it looks like at 2K. I think if you had a better video card than me, you could probably run it at 2K too. It's not too shabby. But it's a lot better at 1K. Yeah, I think it's done. So anyway, I hope that's been helpful. You know, it's a simple material, but it's a cool way of seeing how you can get, you know, the same slider to like control a bunch of different things all at once. So I hope that's been helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.